Yeah, from my side, a big welcome to today's session around diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Just to introduce myself, my name is Kaylin and I'm a business psychologist at Thrive, and I'm really passionate about well-being in the workplace and this topic in particular, because we know through the copious amount of research that's been done that diversity and inclusion is such an important element for organizations. I'm really delighted to be joined by our guest speaker today, Lisa, and I'm going to introduce Lisa momentarily. But I just wanted to say that the whole point of today's session is to really have a discussion around what diversity and inclusion mean, and then how this translates into an organizational setting. So throughout the session, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function on Zoom or the chat function. I'll be keeping an eye on both of those throughout the session today, and I'll be fielding any questions that come through to Lisa. So do please feel free to utilize those functions. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to introduce our wonderful guest speaker, Lisa. Lisa has over 20 years of experience of working in the youth and community sector with local government and also in the voluntary sector as well. She's worked in every discipline of the young people sector, including elements like education, employment, outdoor learning, and also peer education. Lisa has recently accepted the position of CEO at the Proud Trust, and I'm sure Lisa will go into more detail around the Proud Trust and sort of share what they do with you today as well. She joined the Proud Trust from Manchester City Council, where she led the youth play and participation team. And this team are responsible for ensuring that children and young people have access to high quality provision within their areas, as well as fulfilling our Manchester youth strategy as well. So Lisa has a real passion and a real enthusiasm for the work that she's involved in. And Lisa, really looking forward to hearing more of your insight today. So before we start the session and before we get into sort of the questions of today's session, we thought that it might be useful just to ask you as the audience a few questions, if that's okay. So essentially, we have two Slido polls, and I'll explain to you how Slido works in a moment. But really, we're just wanting to find out from you what you're hoping to get out of today's session, firstly. And then secondly, we just want to understand from you what diversity and inclusion means to you on a personal level. So we're going to be utilizing Slido for this. For those of you that are familiar with Slido, feel free to scan the QR code now. But for those of you that aren't, just to say that Slido is a completely anonymous platform. So if you do have access to a smartphone or a tablet with a camera, feel free to scan the QR code that's on the top left-hand side of the screen. That should take you straight through to the Slido platform. If you don't have access to that, that's completely okay. You can also just go to slido.com and then enter the number 044437, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, into slido.com. So I'll just give you a few moments to do that. And like I say, the question here is what are you hoping to get out of today's session? Great, I can see we have some responses coming through, so that means it's all working. If you're struggling to utilize the Slido, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat box. Great, I can see some common themes coming through here, sort of insight, practical tips, knowledge, a broader picture, how you can be a champion at work, understanding how to build an inclusive culture. And I think, Lisa, that's definitely something we're going to be touching on today. I'll just give that a few more moments because I can see some people are still responding to that question. Fantastic. So some key themes coming through there being just more insight, knowledge, sort of practical tips and just a better understanding as well. Great. Thank you so much for those responses. Now, the next question we wanted to ask you, and once again, we're going to use Slido to do this, is what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? So quite keen just to hear your responses to this question. And once again, I'll just give that a few moments. Great, so I can see some responses coming through here. Embracing differences where everyone's voices are heard equally, a safe environment, so creating that safe environment. Understanding differences seems to be a common one coming through. Empathy, absolutely. Respecting everyone. Equity rather than equality coming through there. Thriving together, I like that one. Fantastic. Thank you so much for those responses. I heard a very apt quote the other day, and it was by Verna Myers, and Lisa, you might know this one. And I think for me, it sums up diversity and inclusion so well. It's diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. And for me, I think that really sums it up. But really great to see all your responses coming through and all your different ideas. Here having a mix of people and personalities in your community. I think one of the key ones coming through here, one of the most common ones is this idea about creating a safe environment. So perhaps, Lisa, we can touch on that in a few moments. Maybe we can just start off, or I can just sort of start off by asking you the question, what does diversity and inclusion sort of mean for you? And just sort of any ideas around those concepts and sort of how you differentiate diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lisa Harvey-Nebel and I use she, her pronouns. So diversity and inclusion often used interchangeably, aren't they? We use them in everyday language. We talk about DI strategies or EDI strategies, depending on where you're based, so equality, diversity and inclusion. Diversity in its literal sense means difference. It's about usually referred to organisations that have different people with different characteristics. And we talk about those protected characteristics, be that sexual orientation, gender, or race, religion, ethnicity, whether you have caring responsibilities. Diversity is about ensuring you have all of those different makeups in your organisation, or a diverse interview panel, or a diverse group of people that can answer questions. So that's what diversity means, and it means embracing that difference for me. Inclusion is making sure all of those different and diverse voices are heard. So whatever setting you are in, if we're being fully inclusive, we're doing everything to make sure all of those individuals can participate, can use their voice. And there's some really easy and quick win examples of this. So if we always have our meetings in the pub after work, we might be excluding a whole set of people that don't drink because of their religion. We might be excluding a whole set of people that have caring responsibilities. If we always hold our training sessions on a Friday afternoon, we might be excluding those people that can't travel on public transport or in their cars due to religious practices. So we need to think about everything that we do all of the time. And these are the little things that people fall down on, and they're the things that we don't think about. So if we hold interviews on a day where people have religious responsibilities, or if we don't give people enough notice for an interview and they've got caring responsibilities, how do we expect them to attend? That's what inclusion is about. Have we thought about all of those possibilities and circumstances? So for me, being, a diversity inclusion champion, it's about everything we do every day, every hour of every day of every week. And it's not something that we should switch on and off depending on what we're doing. We talk about EDI a lot of time when we're talking about interviewing people, when we're talking about panels, but actually it should be what we think about all the time in our daily lives. So yeah, for me, obviously really important in the line of work that I do, but not just because I work in the LGBT plus sector. It's really important for young people because they are often the people that are missed out of conversations. They are often the people that we don't think about when we're handing out funding, and they're often the people we don't think about when we're building new highways or we're building new buildings. We don't think about the impact on them. So it's always been a massive part of my life and career.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And from what you've done in the past and what you've just said there, it's very evident that you're very involved in this space. And I just wanted to ask you, what motivated you to get involved and sort of be an advocate for change, really?
Yeah, and that's a really easy question for me to answer. So I come from a very deprived area, raised by a single parent, and we were often worried about food. We were often worried about heat in our home, and we didn't have a lot of money to do things. And the youth service in that area were the people that showed me that you could be different. It's a really white working class area, but they spent time with us. They did the informal education with us, and they made sure our voices were heard. And it's not just the voices about, we don't have any food to eat in our house. It was the voices about, I've got an ambition and I've got aspiration to be different and to do something different. And they always encouraged me to follow that aspiration and to follow that dream. And so when I started to work, I wanted to encourage other young people. I wanted to be that youth worker for young people that felt there was nothing, there was no future for them, felt that they weren't heard. There's a difference between listening to people and hearing people. And because of my own personal experience of being a lesbian, I wanted to make sure that the LGBT plus voices were heard as well, and be that voice of change and challenge for all those people. So this job is bringing those two passions together for me. It's saying I'm working with young people in that youth work setting, but I'm also helping other lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans young people to have their voices heard, to make sure they have access to the provision that they need at the time that they need it. So those two passions have combined for me to work in this organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. And I think sort of maybe a follow-up question from that is why should organizations be focusing on this, right? Why is it so important for organizations to really be thinking about diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, if we don't think that equality and diversity and inclusion matters, what we're saying is that some people matter less than others, that some people don't deserve as much as others. And nobody in this room or in this sector would think that at any time. But what we fail to do is we fail to do the little bits that help people feel more included, that encourage more diversity in an organisation. The Proud Trust is a diverse organisation, but we've still got work to do. We should always be working to be more inclusive. What we know about organisations that are diverse is that they have richer experiences. And when we get richer experiences into a workplace, we get richer ideas, we get richer conversations, and we get richer debates. But also, our people that we work with, whether that be young people, adults, businesses, they might see themselves in a person that works in your organisation, and therefore they might trust you more. They might feel like you understand what they need more and understand their lives more. So it has that massive effect, not just on staff morale, staff inclusion and feeling that sense of belonging. It also opens us up to the wider community and says to other people, look, we want to work with you. We understand we're an inclusive organisation, come and talk to us. So all of those things make a big difference. And what we know from the corporate world is that corporate organisations that are more diverse and inclusive do better, because they reach a far bigger audience and people are more likely to put their faith and trust in them. We all want people to feel happy in the workplace. None of us go into work thinking, I want half of my organisation not to feel happy when they come to work today. We know from the LGBT plus community that if people don't feel they can be their authentic selves, they're holding back from the workplace. So they're all fear about, can I talk about what I did at the weekend? Can I talk about who I was with at the weekend? If people are in that state, they're never going to give their whole selves to the organisation, which means you miss out on that person's energy and that person's authentic self. You know, we all have been in situations where we don't feel safe and calm, so we hide ourselves a little bit and don't give 100%. That in itself is enough for organisations to want to be more diverse and inclusive from my perspective.
Absolutely. And we, like you were saying there, Lisa, we also know through research that the more authentic people feel within their teams, we see better innovation, better productivity. And so I think that element, like you're saying, is just so crucial. Maybe we can spend some time just exploring that authentic that point around authenticity that you made. And I was wondering maybe if you could provide us with some insight around how individuals can actually start to become more authentic within an organizational setting, and what that might look like.
Yeah, I think that doesn't start with the individual. It starts with the people around them in the organisation. So in all the other jobs that I've had in my 25 plus years career in the youth and community sector, this is the first time that I didn't feel nervous about coming to work and talking about my wife. And that's because it's an LGBT plus organisation. So if we're not inclusive here, right, we've got it a little bit wrong. However, I did feel a bit nervous around talking about my faith, because those two things are often at odds. And what we have to do as organisations is be open for all of those protected characteristics that make individuals who they are. And that starts with conversations, doesn't it? And it starts with us checking our language and the language that we're using on a daily basis. So if you go to an organisation and everybody in that organisation is talking about their husband or wife, who is somebody of the opposite gender, those people that are in same gendered relationships are going to feel a little bit more nervous about talking about their partner. If we talk about our religion or our faith in a positive way, those people that have religious or spiritual faith might be more open to talk about that. So it's got to start with everybody in the organisation. There's an element of us as individuals being proud of who we are and being our authentic selves, definitely. But we've all started that new job and felt a bit nervous, haven't we? And we've all started a new job and thought, like me, I want to be accepted in this organisation and I want to be successful. So if we don't feel safe, because there's not lots of diverse language, there's not lots of inclusive discussion, then we're not going to be our whole selves. And yes, we can say to people all the time, be yourself, be authentic. But if those words are not followed by the actions of others around us, we're less likely to do that. So I think there is that element of be yourself and be authentic, but there's also a responsibility on everybody around in the organisation to be open and to be inclusive.
Absolutely. No, completely agree with that, right? It falls as the responsibility of the organization as opposed to the individual, really, you know, as you were saying there. Maybe then, Lisa, a bit of a follow-up question from that then, sort of how do we then start to build these more inclusive relationships? But what can we do to proactively, you know, promote inclusivity and build these relationships within organizations?
In organisations, you know, we can start with those employee groups. We can start by having those safe spaces where like-minded people or people that share a protected characteristic can come together and talk about things. But those employee groups are only going to work and only going to be successful if they're sponsored by the people at the very top. So we know from some of the organisations we work with, in fact, my colleague and I were just talking about really high profile retail organisation earlier, where the managing director was at the employee group meeting and was sharing in the conversation with his colleagues. Now that's really vital, isn't it, that we have sponsorship from the top, that it's not just a strategic compliant thing that we do to say, look, we've got 10 employee groups. So we've got to make sure that up and down the organisation, they are supported and they are valued. We can also start individually with conversations. You know, we've lost the art a little bit of face-to-face interaction and conversation because we've had 2.5 years of Zoom, but we can ask people about themselves. and talk about ourselves openly. We can make sure that we're using the correct pronouns for people. And if they don't choose to tell us, ask them, what pronouns do you use? I use these pronouns. Little things like putting your pronouns on your email footer, that makes somebody who's got maybe different pronouns to everyone else think, well, they're going to be okay with this. I can have a conversation. I can be myself with that person. So those little interactions that we have with people can all make a big difference, and we can talk using that inclusive language. I think also, you know, we can put things out that show that we are diverse and inclusive right through the year, and not just choose specific months to pick up on a particular topic. So, you know, we see loads of things in February for LGBT History Month and June for Pride Month, where people change their logos to the rainbow and they talk about all of the things that they do that are LGBT plus inclusive. What about the rest of the year? We want people to be inclusive right through the year. We could put little bits of information out about religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, family, you know, right through the year, that encourages people to be open, encourages people to feel safe and to be themselves.
Absolutely. And I really like the point there, your first point that you touched on around role modeling, and how, like you were saying, these behaviors have to sort of come from the top and filter down. And I think there's quite a big element there of organizations, you know, maybe being conscious about that. What are our leaders doing, and how might they be role modeling those behaviors? You also touched on a point there, Lisa, around having a conversation with someone, you know, the simple act of having a conversation. But I do know in saying that sometimes people are quite afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing, or that they might be a little bit intrusive. What recommendations do you have around that, so people don't feel afraid to actually just start that conversation with someone else?
Really interesting question. We get this question all the time, particularly from teachers or social workers. You know, it's like any other conversation we've seen with the mental health and emotional well-being research and promotions over the past couple of years. How are you? How are you? Asking twice, you know, and that's not dissimilar for everything else, is it? You know, if I introduce myself to somebody and say, I'm Lisa and I use she, her pronouns, that opens up a conversation, doesn't it? And it opens up a conversation whether that person is part of the LGBT plus community or not. The conversation is either, well, I use these pronouns, or, oh, that's interesting. Why do you use pronouns? And what I would say is, I've had loads of conversations with people about my sexual orientation, and I'm always willing to have the open conversation as long as it's coming from a good and positive place. Yeah. And we can tell that by the tone of people. We can tell that by their non-verbal cues, can't we? You know, I don't get upset if people ask me those questions because they're coming from a good place. If somebody says it to me in a derogatory manner or tone, I am going to be offended because the offence is coming, but I would put the challenge back. Sometimes it's about asking, what do you mean by this word? And other times it could be simply about asking, tell me about yourself. You know, do we spend enough time just asking people, talk to me, I'm here to listen and hear? And do we spend enough time really listening and hearing people, or are we thinking of the next response that we want to say to them? So, you know, we get a lot of people saying, well, I'm scared of saying the wrong thing or using the wrong terminology. We'll ask the question, is this the right word to use? What word would you prefer me to use? Oh, and why should I use that word? Because it's no point knowing the word but not understanding the reason behind it. Just be really open to the conversation, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks, Lisa. I see we have had a question in the chat around the closed captioning for this meeting, so turning that on. I have had a look. I'm going to try do it now, but I'm not too sure of the settings. If anyone can sort of provide me with guidance around that, please do let me know. Great. And also just on that note, just a reminder to the audience that as Lisa is sort of answering these questions, please do feel free to also pop your questions into the Q&A feature as well. We'd love to hear from you and just hear anything that you might want to know as well. So just a reminder to also feel free to utilize the Q&A. Lisa, I guess another question for you, sort of following on from that, might be, what are some of the long-term consequences for organizations if they sort of just ignore diversity and inclusion in the long run? What are the potential consequences of that?
Well, for a start, you're going to be excluding your organisation from a whole percentage of society and community around you. What will happen is you'll have lots of individuals that think the same way, behave the same way and talk the same way, which doesn't lend itself to innovation. It doesn't lend itself to challenge, and it doesn't lend itself to movement. Without diverse people in an organisation, we don't get diverse ideas. And it's as simple as that for me. But also what it means is we probably get a reputation from the community around us and from other organisations that we're a particular type of organisation and that diverse individuals are not welcome there. That's not a reputation that any of us want. We're all striving to be inclusive and diverse and have a really good EDI policy. So for me, if we're not representative of the people that we serve or the communities around us, we can't possibly believe that we can do a good job moving forward. So that for me would be the biggest issue. We've also got that issue of we're never going to be keeping up to date with what's going on in the world because we're just reinforcing the same behaviour time and time again, which means again, that we're not innovative, we're not attractive to people to come as an organisation, and we'll lose the talent pool, won't we? We've got to think about the next generation that are going to take over from the jobs that we're doing. If we're not a diverse organisation, those young people are not going to come through, and organisations will slowly decline.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we also know the whole idea there of also collaboration, right? We get the best collaboration out of people when we are actively promoting the diversity and difference within our teams as well. I guess then, Lisa, how can organizations really start making diversity and inclusion a priority? What are some practical steps that they might be able to take to really start prioritizing diversity and inclusion and sort of promoting that within the organization?
Well, the first thing for me is it's not about a policy. So, in this country, we're policy mad, aren't we? We like to have a policy for absolutely everything. And a policy doesn't solve an issue, it makes an issue go away. So policies are great that we can refer back to, but simply asking every colleague in your organisation to read the EDI policy is not doing what it needs to do. What I would say is we need to mirror behaviour right from the bottom up. We need to be able to challenge senior leaders about the language they use or the behaviours that they exhibit on a daily basis. We need to put EDI at the start of all agendas. That should be the first thing that we talk about. Does everybody feel included in this organisation? Are we representative of the community around us or the people that we serve? Often EDI is the last thing on an agenda and it gets pushed and pushed and pushed until it's a 5-minute conversation. And I say we need to reframe that and we need to put it at the start of the agenda so that it has the gravitas and importance and everybody knows that. The buy-in of senior leadership, like I said earlier, is massive. If everybody thinks that senior leadership are on board with EDI, they will be on board because we all like to please, don't we? We all like to be a part of that. And making sure that, when we are recruiting, we're thinking about EDI, we're thinking about the panels that we have, we're thinking about where we put adverts out, and we're thinking about the types of questions we ask, and how we make things more inclusive for working parents, for those with religious beliefs, for LGBT plus community, whatever it is, we need to think about how we adapt to invite the best people to our organisation, rather than getting people in the organisation and expecting them to adapt to us.
Yeah.
You know, that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. And I think if someone was wanting to be sort of a diversity and inclusion advocate within the organisation, but maybe they weren't too sure where to start or how to go about being sort of an advocate for change, how would you recommend they start? Where's a good starting point?
I'd say, you know, depending on where you want to start, because it's hard to be that advocate across the spectrum, isn't it? Right from the get-go. It can be as simple as starting with a rainbow lanyard or an ID badge that says, I'm a mental health first aider, or that has your pronouns on it. It can be as simple as putting diversity and inclusion at the start of your conversations with everybody that you have a conversation with, and asking people, do you feel safe at work? Do you feel included in things that we do here? Are we meeting your needs as an individual? And it can be as massive as holding we're all going to fast for Ramadan one day to support our colleagues that are fasting, or we're going to ensure that we are more flexible for those individuals that are observing the fasting period so that they can work at different times, making sure they're still taking their breaks when they need to. You know, all of those little acts mean that you are being a change agent. People often think you have to do massive things to be a change agent, and I would say that's what stops a lot of people from starting. Start with something small, put pronouns on the bottom of your email.
Absolutely.
Simple.
Thanks, Lisa. I think it's exactly that. People think you have to do this massive thing to start being an advocate, and like you say, it's as simple as pronouns on your email. I see we've got a question that's come in, sort of around the point you made on pronouns, and the question reads: do you have any specific tips that you can share about encouraging pronoun usage without accidentally causing conversations in the office that might be damaging towards those using non-traditional pronouns? So any hints and tips you might have around that?
Yeah, you've got to be really confident, I think, to use those pronouns, because as soon as you start to put pronouns on your email footer, some people are going to ask you the question why, but there also might be some side conversations, and the side conversations for me are the ones that can be the most dangerous. And I think they happen when we are a bit nervous about how we explain things and a bit nervous about why we're doing things and where it's coming from. The other thing about pronoun usage is it can inadvertently out somebody when they're not ready to be outed. So if we've got non-binary colleagues and you say everybody has to put their pronouns on the bottom of their email and they're going to put they, them pronouns, nobody knows, then it could out them. What I would say is there's lots of training out there around why the use of pronouns. There's lots of research out there about why the use of pronouns, but it can start with a conversation in a team meeting. Pronouns are important because it's important that we address people in the right way, in the way that they want to be addressed. You know, so I would say if you put in those pronouns in the bottom of your email footer, be prepared to have the conversation. And don't make it a necessity that everybody does it. So this shouldn't be a directive, put your pronouns on. I would also say that needs to start at the top as well. So if you're going to do it as an agent for change, get a sponsor that's in the leadership team that also puts their pronouns on. So it becomes less of, oh, this is something different, and more of this is the norm. But be prepared for those workshops that you need to have around gender identity, around pronouns, around how to be more LGBT plus inclusive.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. Like you say there, I think that the piece there on just creating awareness is a great place to start for organizations, right? So getting facilitators in, providing that training is so important, just to help people understand more, and like you say, create awareness. There's another question that's come in, and please do keep your questions coming in. It's really great to see. So like I say, you can utilize the Q&A or utilize the chat. And Lisa, the question goes, do you have any thoughts on staff being asked to volunteer time to build and develop these EDI initiatives versus hiring a full-time person with specific experience to help guide the company? What are your thoughts around that?
I think it really depends on if you can afford the time within your organisation. My personal opinion on that is it's better that it's within the organisation and sponsored from people within the organisation. There's a real danger that if we parachute in experts, EDI experts, to set up a piece of work for us or to do a series of events, that people attend it but they don't buy into it. You know, this has got to be embedded in an organisation. You know, if you're going to ask people from within the organisation to do that piece of work, give them the time to do it. Create the time in their day so that you're showing that you value it as an organisation. You know, it's not saying to be this to happen, but you have to do it in your own time. That's not creating an inclusive workplace. That's saying to people, oh yeah, we sort of think it's important, but not important enough to build it into your capacity and your time. So make sure that people have the time and space in their diaries to attend those meetings. Make sure that, you know, senior leadership are issuing to all managers, you've got to release your staff to attend these meetings. You know, if they want to attend a network meeting, they should be able to in their time. But that takes me back again to make sure it's at a time that can fit with everyone. You know, there's no good holding a meeting at a lunchtime in a central base office when you've got satellite provision right across an area. You know, you need to think about all that time. If you can't create time within your organisation, but you do have the financial resource to bring somebody in, what I would say is make sure that there's an end point where that does pass over to colleagues in the organisation, or create the EDI job in your organisation so it's their job to do that. But you still have to create time, have to engage in that process.
Absolutely. Thanks for that insight, Lisa. I completely agree. I think just to pull out some key elements there, that time that you were talking about is so important, because I think often organizations take on these initiatives, but, you know, the employees still have full-time jobs and other commitments. So actually, I think a key practical tip that perhaps, you know, some of the participants can take away today is, okay, am I actually providing the time, or am I sort of receiving the time to sort of be an advocate for change and initiate change, really? So I think that's a really valuable point. Just on that, I was just curious to sort of get your opinion around sort of networks, because a lot of our clients that we work with have been really proactive in this sort of this diversity and inclusion space, and have sort of established a range of networks across their organization. So maybe just any practical hints and tips from you around sort of perhaps the importance of doing that, the difference it can make, how, you know, an organization might sort of start to build the network. Yeah, just any sort of practical hints and tips you have around that would be great.
Yeah, in terms of starting the network, you know, have a clear vision is what I would say, and put out a clear message to colleagues across the organisation why it's important. You know, if people just see, oh, all of a sudden there is a BAME network or an LGBT plus network or a women's network, but they don't understand what direction the organisation is going in, why the organisation thinks it's important, people may think it's a tick box and therefore not put their whole selves into it. So I think it's really important to say to people, we recognise that we have a diverse workforce. We recognise that in our workforce, there are individuals that have protected characteristics, and therefore we think this network is important. Networks are really important as long as they're given the value and the power to engage with colleagues, but also to affect change. It's no point having a network where there's not the power to affect change. You know, they should have action plans assigned to them that those individuals have brought together to make the organisation a better place, a more inclusive place, a safer place. And they should have the sponsorship from senior leadership teams. It shouldn't just be, oh, we meet once a week at lunchtime and have a brew. Yes, there's space for that collective support, but in order for it to be really beneficial across the organisation, they've got to be given the money, the resource, the time, and the follow through. You know, if there's an action plan where all colleagues need to attend equality and diversity training, that should be part of essential training, not tick box training. You know, it shouldn't be used as a tick box. It shouldn't be used as the policy says we should have a network, so therefore we do. There should be real value attached to it.
Absolutely. And I think it's, so again, just to reiterate those sort of key themes that you've touched on, you know, the importance once again of role modeling, like you were saying, the importance of making sure that there's time and resource for those networks. I think that those are such key points and hopefully sort of key takeaways from today's session as well. I see, Lisa, we've got a question that's come through in the chat that I think is quite interesting. So I'm just going to read it out. And it goes, would it potentially be better to meet in the middle and have someone that has the skills or understanding to handle difficult conversations, who can work with impacted individuals to represent them?
That's an interesting question.
I thought so too.
You know, there's two sides for this for me. The first side is it shouldn't be a difficult conversation, and we have to explore why we believe it's a difficult conversation. If we believe it's a difficult conversation because we're afraid of saying something wrong, then I go back to my earlier point about intention and tone and the language that we use. If we believe it's a difficult conversation because of the lack of our knowledge, then let's do more training. You know, let's do more awareness raising across the organisation. There is definitely a place for EDI specialists, and they can be really useful in organisations to facilitate the discussions. But I would say we use those EDI specialists, and even in my organisation, we use those specialists so that senior leaders can be involved in the discussions and are not facilitating them, so that we get that full buy-in right across the organisation. If you separate it out from where the organisation is, for me, that means we're excluding that group of individuals a little bit further, because we're saying, oh, we need somebody external to come in and talk to you about the issues. We need somebody external to come in so that we can understand and be the broker, be that bridge for you. I would say let's break down the barrier of that and let's have the conversation. Yes, they might be difficult at the start and they might be uncomfortable, but we all know that when we have those uncomfortable and difficult conversations, they lead to more knowledge, they lead to better understanding, and they lead to better collective action. You know, collective action is paramount, isn't it? So if we're going to bring in an outside source, there needs to be a clear plan for how that is then embedded back into the organisation.
Absolutely, yeah, completely agree with that, Lisa. I see we've got a raised hand. I'm just going to, I think it's Karen. I'm just going to unmute you, so feel free to ask your question. I can see your hand is raised. No?
I think Karen is on mute still.
Yeah. Okay. No worries, Karen. If you do want to ask your question, feel free to unmute yourself. I think, Lisa, just a follow-up question or a point to what you were saying there, you know, talking about the importance of sort of conversations and how to have those conversations. I was just wondering, do you have any practical hints and tips around how someone might sort of navigate that? Just anything around, you know, or just if you could allude to the conversation point that you were touching on earlier.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what venue the conversation is and what conversation is. So if it's a conversation between two individuals, it can be as simple as, oh, what did you do at the weekend? Tell me about your life, can't it? You know, it can be as simple as really paying attention to the person that you're talking to. If it's a wider organisational conversation, I think that has to come with some context for people. So if it's that a senior leader or a manager in the organisation wants to have a conversation about whether people feel included, the first thing is that they need to feel safe to open up about that. They need to feel that whatever they say is not going to affect their role or their job or their position in the organisation. And I would say that building that safety and security starts with the individual conversations. So there should be those conversations during supervision or one-to-one or appraisals. Then there should be EDI on every agenda. And when you do all of those things, then people feel more comfortable to have the conversation whilst you're making a brew or having your lunch and really paying attention. There will be LGBT plus people in every organisation.
Yeah.
And if you don't know any, that probably gives you an indication that they don't feel safe to talk about who they are or to be authentic. So I guess it's for all of us to challenge the way we behave around people and just make those little changes so that safety increases.
Yeah.
People feel like they can be more themselves and people feel like they can share more of themselves.
Absolutely, Lisa. And I really like what you were saying earlier about it's the little things, you know, it's not, we don't have to do these massive things. There are a lot of small wins that organizations can start with, and essentially, you know, even start today, because it's quite easy to implement really. Lisa, I wondered if you could just allude to or give a little bit more detail around perhaps the use of language, if that would be okay. I know it is something you looked at earlier and you did mention it briefly, but I know certainly in our conversation that we had prior to today's session, you were telling me a little bit around just the implications of the use of language. So I wondered if you wouldn't mind providing the audience with a little bit more detail around that.
I alluded a little bit to it earlier, didn't I, that if we all talk about our husband or wife and they're the opposite gender to us, then it can make some people who are in same-sex relationships feel a little bit awkward, like they don't want to share. But also it's about the language we use on our emails, the language we use on referral forms. If we're asking people, are you male or female? We're excluding a whole bunch of people in the population that identify as non-binary, and we're not giving them that option. And sometimes we do that because it's about our systems can't handle that option of non-binary. So we put things like prefer not to say. Well, actually, a lot of people would be quite comfortable to say they identify as non-binary. When we talk about our lives and when we talk about the work we do, if we use gendered language, that can pose a problem for some individuals. That's something that I've had to change throughout my career. When I did my training as a youth worker, we were taught to use the term guys as collective language to get the attention of the room. But actually, if we think about that, it's very male gendered. It excludes the female gender. But it also excludes those individuals that don't identify as male or female. The other side is that if we've got a trans female in the room, they don't want to be referred to the gender that they were assigned at birth. So there's all those complexities that we need to think about. And language, you know, we start very young, don't we? And we're indoctrinated into the language that our family use, and then our education settings use, and then our work life uses. So it's just about us having that thought process about, am I misgendering somebody in the way that I talk? Am I excluding somebody in the way that I talk? And that's, you know, the same right across the board. And it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I'm not sitting here saying this is a really easy thing to do, but we can make those small changes. So we can use folks instead of guys. We can say, good afternoon, everyone, instead of good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, when we're opening speeches. You know, all those little things make a big difference to people feeling accepted in the room. And like I say, you know, this is something that lots of us in the Proud Trust have to think about. We have to think about the language that we're using and almost untrain ourselves from a lifetime of this is how we talk.
Yeah, absolutely, Lisa. And I can personally relate to guys because, like you say, it's almost, you know, sometimes it's a little bit of a habit. Hello, guys, how are you doing? And that's something that I've certainly become a lot more conscious of over sort of the past few months. Actually, you know, trying to really be mindful of the language that I use when I do address a group or sort of in a team meeting, and just sort of, you know, really just think about that. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Takes a lot of thought.
No, it's something that I'm consciously sort of thinking about and challenging myself on as well. We have a very interesting question here from Sarah, or one that's perhaps a little bit more practical. And she's asking you, Lisa, do you have any advice on useful calendars that include religious holidays or days of celebration, etc., so that staff can have a better awareness of what their colleagues may be celebrating or practicing whilst in work? Because general calendars tend to be quite limited with what they put on. So, you know, how it, you know, she's basically saying here it would sort of encourage or support conversation in a department. So just wondering if you have any hints and tips around that.
Yeah, there's actually a really good diversity days calendar. I was just getting up the link, which I will then post in the chat for everybody, which shows you all of the religious holidays, all of the LGBT plus holidays, and you know, gives you all of those international days. So today is the International Day of Trans Visibility, 31st of March. And there is probably something on most days. So, you know, we couldn't possibly celebrate everything. You know, no organisation could unless they are a diversity and inclusion organisation. But those calendars are used a lot in schools and in youth services to make sure that they can pick up on some of those points. Diversity calendars are a great way to encourage employees to talk about their lives as well. You know, you can host a opening of fasting meal when it's Ramadan, or you can talk about Lent for those that are of the Christian faith, or like today, you can talk about trans visibility and use some examples and good case studies that, you know, show people's journeys and why it's important to have these days. So I'll try and find one of the calendars and link to it so that people can look at it. If you just put that in the Google search, it'll bring one up with every single day of the year.
Great, thanks, Lisa. That'll be fantastic. I am conscious of the time, and I did just want to give you a few minutes, Lisa, just to talk around what you're doing at the Proud Trust. Yeah, it'd be really great just to get your insight into what you're doing and just the various trainings that you might be able to offer, and how people can reach out to you and get in contact with you.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, the Proud Trust is an organisation that's been running for approximately 40 years now. It started with that premise of young people need a safe space to discuss their gender, their sexual orientation, to find themselves, to feel that they can be authentic. So we have a base in Manchester City Centre, just off Oxford Road. It was originally the first gay centre to be built in the UK, and back then we worked, you know, primarily with gay young men. Now we are an LGBT inclusive centre. We're still only one of 5 purpose-built centres across Europe. So that just shows you still how we're not ahead of the times in terms of providing that safe space for our young people. We work with young people in youth groups, one-to-ones in schools, and we work with their parents and the professionals that support them. So we have a youth work team, a one-to-one team, a Proud Connections team, which is a digital help service, but we also have a training and education team, and they have a national remit. our ambition is firstly that we're not needed anymore, because that would be the ideal, wouldn't it? That young people feel safe wherever they are and safe to be whoever they are and proud of that. But ultimately that young people feel safe in all of their settings. So we want young people to access our services, to feel confident, to get the support they need. But we also want to make sure that youth workers are trained in other organisations so that they can have those conversations that they might feel were a bit difficult, that teachers and social workers feel confident to have those conversations, but parents feel confident to have those conversations as well. Our training team has a variety of packages. We split it now, so we do the lesbian, gay, bisexual education and awareness bit, and then we do the trans and non-binary bit, because that's the bit that people are most fearful of now. People want to get the right language, they want to understand things. So we've separated that out to make sure that we can give it the time that it deserves. The Proud Trust works across Greater Manchester, Chester and Cheshire West, but we also have that national training reach. So we would encourage people to touch base with us. If you're thinking about training, check in with us, because we're a charity. We want to do the best for Greater Manchester and Cheshire and Chester West, but we also want to make sure that people have access to the right resources. And on our website, there are a load of resources that are free for people to download. There's loads of information about all the things we've discussed today. And also there's the contact information if people want to get in touch.
Thanks, Lisa. I see a question's come through here around, is there a volunteer element that individuals might be able to get involved with at the Proud Trust?
Yeah, we have a volunteer element, and there's two sides of it. So firstly, we have a lot of corporate volunteers that will support us with the day-to-day things in the organisation, when we need help with events, when we need furniture building, all of that sort of stuff. And then we have volunteers who are mentors to young people. We ask for volunteers to have some lived experience so that our young people can relate, and there can be a two-way conversation about positive changes and how you can be authentic in your own life and how things can feel nice and better for you. Because when you're 13 and everything is changing around you, it can feel a little bit scary. So we have mentor training that operates 3 times across the year. Those dates are available on our website. But we also, invite volunteers for our youth groups. There's lots of training and checks to go through, obviously, to make sure young people are kept safe. But we welcome the support. We're a charity, and obviously most charities operate on the value of volunteer time.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lisa. So if anyone does want to get in touch, I think there is an email address there, so please do feel free to contact Lisa and the team. Just to end off and say, Lisa, from us at Thrive, a massive thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all your valuable insight, your practical information that you've shared with us, your knowledge, and thank you for also just being so open and honest about your experience too. I think today's session has been really great. I've certainly taken a lot away from it. So yeah, just a big thank you for your time.
My pleasure. I hope that it's been useful for everybody that's been on the call, but please do feel free to get in touch with us.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day and keep well, stay safe.